In this video, we're going to be talking about the Pinnacle of Flame quest and the final Pinnacle boss in PoE 2, the Arbiter of Ash, including of course a guide to the boss fight and explanation of the mechanics, but also how to access the fight and some farming tips, an overview of the skill tree and my recommendations, and some info on the loot and rewards for completing the fight. To start the Pinnacle of Flame quest, you need to access the Burning Monolith from your Atlas map. It will be indicated by this icon and should have spawned quite close to your starting point. Once you've discovered it, you should always have the icon available indicating the direction of the monolith, and clicking it will take you directly to it. Inside, you will come across a door that requires placing 3 different crisis fragments into it to unlock. Crisis fragments are drops that come from completing Citadels, with each one dropping a specific type of fragment, so you'll need to complete at least one of each unless you purchase them from other players. Finding the Citadels is much easier now than it was at the start of early access. You can spot them in the distant fog by looking for these beams of light. There's a minimum distance away from your starting point that you must travel before the Citadels can spawn, so if you're not seeing them anywhere on your Atlas or in the fog, you might need to travel out away from your starting area a bit more. Just pick one direction and travel in a somewhat straight line outward, hitting towers as you come across them, and eventually you'll start to see them off in the distance. The Iron Citadel is indicated by this white or blue beam, contains the Act 1 boss Count Geonor, and drops the Ancient Crisis fragment. The Copper Citadel is indicated by an orange beam, contains the Act 2 boss Jamanra the Abomination, and drops the Faded Crisis fragment. And the Stone Citadel is indicated by a red beam, contains the Act 3 boss Doriani, and drops the Weathered Crisis fragment. The mechanics for these fights are basically the same as they were in the campaign, and you'll likely kill them much faster now depending on your character level and overall power, so I won't be going into those fights in detail in this video. Generally speaking though, if you want an easier time, I'd recommend removing any boss skill tree points before attempting them. Citadels are considered boss maps, so any difficulty increase you have in the skill tree will apply to these fights as well, and even though Citadels are easier to find now, it's still not fun dying in one and losing the map. If you fail it, you don't get another shot, so you'll have to track down another Citadel to try again. Keep in mind that the waystones you use for Citadels is important. Citadels can only be attempted with tier 15 plus waystones, and the amount of crisis fragments that drop is influenced by waystone drop chance, which can be increased by certain nodes in your Atlas tree, by using precursor tablets that increase it, and from the waystones themselves. On the waystones, the drop chance is based on the suffixes it has, so the more suffixes, the higher your drop chance will be, generally getting around 100% increase per suffix. So if you wanted, you could use a Val Orb and try for more suffixes. But I wouldn't recommend that necessarily for your first try unless you're really confident, because some of the suffixes can be pretty brutal when combined. I've completed quite a few Citadels, each falling somewhere between 300 and 850% increased waystone drop chance, and most of the time I got 2 waystones, with a couple on the high end getting 3, and a couple on the low end only getting 1. At least 1 fragment is guaranteed to drop, and I believe you can get up to 4 to drop if you manage to get your waystone drop chance around 1000% or higher. Once you have all 3 fragments, you can take them to the Burning Monolith to attempt the Pinnacle boss fight. Originally, you only had 1 attempt per set of fragments, and failing would mean you have to go around and get 3 more fragments before you could try again. A recent patch has changed this though, and now you'll have 6 attempts at the boss fight the first time you try it. The number of attempts you're allowed decreases as you increase the difficulty through the Arbiter skill tree, with only a single attempt once you max out the difficulty. This at least gives you a little leeway for learning the fight and the mechanics, and feels much less punishing than it was before. So don't stress too much the first time you go in there, because you'll have a few tries to get it right. Before you enter, there are a few things you can do to improve your overall odds of success. First is gearing around the fact that the boss deals a lot of fire damage. Having capped fire resistance is pretty much required, and if you can manage to push your maximum fire resistance above 75%, for example with a couple ruby jewels, it could help out quite a bit by reducing the total damage that you'll take. Similarly, using an Ignite Charm can mitigate some damage, and would be a good idea to throw on if you have one available. The other important thing to have is high movement speed. You need to be very mobile for this fight. You want at least 30%, probably 35% movement speed on your boots, and ideally some more movement speed somewhere in your build. If you're not quick on your feet, you will almost certainly die, likely to a one-shot mechanic. It could also be helpful if your build uses blink or allows for an offhand blink setup, especially for the higher tier fights once you've increased the difficulty. The fight will always open up the same way, with the Arbiter firing a beam of fire in a straight line directly in front of him, so be prepared to sidestep as soon as it starts. It's pretty easy to avoid, but will do quite a bit of damage if you do manage to get hit by it. Occasionally, he'll shoot out a single small fireball, which again is pretty easy to dodge and doesn't do much damage if you do happen to get hit with it. If you see the boss open both his arms and 2 orbs start to form, he will shoot them out in front of him, and each will shoot out a number of projectiles. Ideally, you want to run behind him for this, as the further you are away from them, the more spread out the projectiles will be. If you're in front of him and the fireballs, you could get hit by multiple at once, dealing quite a bit of damage. If you see the boss start to dash around the room, he's starting what are referred to as donut nukes, and bombs will start to descend from above, each at a location he dashed to in order. You must be inside the ring when these hit the ground, or you will get one shot. Be careful with your placement, because if any part of your character is outside of the circle, it can kill you. There have been a few times where I was near the edge and thought I was inside, but died when it went off. As soon as one goes off, head to the next one until they're all gone. One of the most dangerous attacks the Arbiter has is this one where he'll jump in the air and create these hallways. This is one of the times that you really need your movement speed. The entire arena is covered in orange, and you need to immediately get inside the blue section or hallway. If you're in the orange when it goes off, you will die. As soon as it goes off, you need to spot the next one and get to it as soon as possible. The slightest hesitation or misstep here could end it all. My first few attempts, this is what killed me the most. Once you get the hang of it though, it's really not too bad, and now I can do it pretty easily and consistently. Once you get the boss to around 65% health or lower, he will teleport to the middle of the room to begin phase 2. You'll notice this is happening when you see his wings pop out and him pull the sword from the ground. During this animation he can't be damaged, but once it finishes, phase 2 starts and he will gain some new ability. Usually, right as this phase begins, you'll see a couple orbs spawn on the ground, one blue and one purple. If they are ignored, they will power up his weapons and attacks, with the blue one causing him to chill on hit, and the purple dealing additional damage. So you'll want to clear these as soon as possible. Walking over them will cover the arena in blue or purple depending on which one you hit first, with the blue one covering it in a chilled ground slowing you, and a purple one creating a mild burning ground that can ignite you. No matter which one you hit, just go find the other to nullify the effect. In this phase, the boss also has a basic sword attack or swing, which is pretty easy to avoid and dodge out of. And if it does happen to hit you, it doesn't do a ton of damage, but you should still just generally try to avoid it. If you see the boss standing still with his sword spinning in front of him like this, you'll want to get to his side or behind him. A large beam or column will fire and shoot out in front of him, dealing a ton of fire damage. During the donut nuke attack, he has a similar move in which he draws his sword back while the bomb is dropping, and then fires directly in front of him over top of the circle. If you see this coming, you will need to stand just outside of where it will go off and time it perfectly so that when it goes off, you dodge roll into the circle so that the bomb doesn't kill you. This is what usually kills me now that I've learned the entire boss fight. It's really just getting the timing down on this, because the timing is very tight and quite difficult, but it can be done. It is technically possible to live through this attack, but to do so, you have to have increased your maximum fire resistance up quite high, probably close to 80-85% maybe, and you need to have quite a bit of health, or energy shield or whatever. For most people though, getting hit by it will one-shot you, and you'll want to avoid it. The boss also has a couple of moves where he'll jump up into the air, and then either ground slam himself, or slam his sword down into the ground, dealing AoE damage in a circle around it. If you see him jump up into the air, generally you just want to move out and run around and avoid any orange areas on the ground until he's back down on the ground himself. One of the other moves he has when he jumps up into the air is that he'll fly across the center of the arena, splitting it in half and leaving a burning trail on the ground. This will deal fire damage to you if you stand or step in it, but you can dodge roll through it if you need to get across it. Another move that shows up in phase 2 is this pulsing fireball. It will be located directly in the center of the arena, and every couple seconds will pulse, shooting out a circular wave of fireballs. These can do a decent amount of damage if they hit you, and should be dodge rolled through if possible, because especially while the boss is doing other moves can be quite dangerous. I believe that covers all the moves and mechanics that you'll need to know for the fight. If your damage is high enough, especially for the first couple of difficulties, it's possible to do so much damage that you skip some of the mechanics entirely. Ideally, the hallways or the nuke combo with a large firewall beam, making the fight quite a bit easier. The first time you kill the Arbiter, you will receive a skill book with your first 2 Arbiter skill points, and one of these uniques. The Warrior Invictus is the most valuable of the bunch, worth multiple divines depending on which socket modifiers you get and their rolls. Fortunately, this has the highest drop chance of all the unique drops available, and every kill I've got so far dropped one. Your first kill will also complete your Pinnacle of Flame quest, and once you talk to Doriani, you will receive a skill book for the last 2 points in your boss skill tree. Speaking on the skill trees, your first 2 Arbiter skill points have to go to Ancient Relics, increasing the rarity of items dropped by the Arbiter. Each subsequent time you kill the Arbiter, as long as you've spent your previous skill points to increase the difficulty, you'll receive another skill book and 2 points until you have all 8. For your second and third points, I'd recommend getting Central Terraformer and Witness to History. I personally went with Central Terraformer first because it guarantees a corrupted rare precursor tablet, while Witness to History only gives a 20% chance for an extra drop. I haven't got my final point yet, but when I do, it will go to Modular Servant for an extra 10% chance for a valuable socket currency, i.e. a perfect Jeweler's Orb. Alternatively, you could get Lost Techniques, which is a 10% chance for a valuable gem, which I believe would be a level 20 skill gem, but those aren't as valuable as perfect Jeweler's Orbs, so it doesn't seem worth it to me. I wouldn't recommend taking the Way Forward, as it just gives 3 tier 15 Waystones, which are pretty easy to come by. Once you have all 8 points allocated to the tree, the Arbiter's loot table includes 2 additional uniques, the Sacred Flame Scepter and Prism of Belief Diamond. The Sacred Flame is currently worth somewhere around 1 divine, and the Prism of Belief varies massively depending on the skill and the value it rolls. On the low end, it could be worth only a few Exalted Orbs, but it could also be worth hundreds of divines. With the huge range of possible value, it's hard to recommend or say that it's worth actually farming difficulty 4 Arbiter. Keep in mind that with each difficulty increase, you get less respawn attempts. So at difficulty 4, you only have a single attempt, and each attempt also requires all 3 Crisis Fragments. At current values, the 3 fragments combined are worth between 3 and 4 divine, so I think you're almost better off just selling those rather than taking the gamble at the boss fight. If you're able to consistently kill it at difficulty 4 and you get lucky with drops, it could definitely pay off, but you could also get unlucky and get nowhere near the cost of entry. Personally, I'm still at a point where I'm struggling a bit with difficulty 3, so I think I'm just going to start selling any fragments I get. That said, I definitely recommend completing it at least once to get your final 2 boss skill tree points and your first 2 Arbiter skill points. And if you enjoy the fight and don't mind a little gamble, difficulty 1 or 2 may be worth farming because you'll get multiple attempts, and Warrior Invictus is likely to drop and could pay off if you get good rolls. What do you think though? Let me know in the comments below if you think I'm off base or missed anything. If you enjoyed this video or it helped you out at all, be sure to toss it a like or subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a ton and is greatly appreciated. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.